Wire the first payment by Friday. Your father already put a deposit down on the motorhome. I read that message twice while standing in the parking lot of a hardware store in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, with a bag of furnace filters in one hand and 31 degrees of November wind cutting straight through my coat. My mother had sent it. My mother, who had not called me on my birthday in 4 years. She wasn't asking me for money. She was billing me for it. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the money they were trying to take was locked behind a confidentiality agreement so tight I could lose every penny of it just by explaining where it came from. And they were about to walk into a courtroom, raise their right hands, and swear to a story that would end them. My name is Louise Ann Prout. Everybody's called me Lou since I was 6. I'm 39 years old, and for most of my life I was the one who fixed things quietly so nobody else had to notice they were broken. If you've ever been the reliable one in your family, the one everybody calls when the transmission goes out, the one nobody calls when things are good, stay with me. Tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're watching from, because I want to know how many of us there are. And stay till the end, because the part that changes everything doesn't happen in that parking lot. It happens in a room on the 11th floor of a building in downtown Des Moines, when a man I'd never met slid a folder across a table and my father's face came apart like wet paper. I put the furnace filters in the back of my truck. My phone buzzed again before I could shut the tailgate. Lou, answer me. We know you have it. I didn't answer. I drove home with the heater roaring and the radio off, and when I got to my little brick house on the east side of town, I did what I always do when the world gets loud. I put the filters in the closet where they belonged. I lined up my boots on the mat. I wiped the counter that was already clean. When the people who are supposed to be your foundation start trying to tip you over, you find small ways to hold on to the ground. You straighten a rug. You square a stack of mail. You control the things that actually answer to you, because the people on the other end of that phone never will. My family had decided, overnight and with total certainty, that I was sitting on a fortune that belonged to them, not partly to them, and the strangest part wasn't even that they were wrong about where the money came from. The strangest part was that not one of them asked me a single question first. They didn't ask if I was all right. They didn't ask if it was true. They sent an invoice. Let me back up, because you need to understand the shape of the house I grew up in. My brother Wade is 44. For the last 20 years, he has been 6 months away from the thing that's finally going to work out. He's had a lawn care company, a food truck, a stretch selling supplements out of the garage, and for the last 4 years, a barbecue place off Highway 30 called Smokehouse 30 that has never once turned a profit but has one of the nicest neon signs in Lynn County. Wade is charming. I want to be fair to him. He can walk into a room and have 3 strangers laughing inside a minute. He remembers what beer you like. He calls our mother Mama in that soft voice that makes her go misty. And every time the numbers came due, he called our parents. My father, Roy, and my mother, Deanna, have spent 2 decades treating Wade like an investment they're too far in to walk away from. When the food truck's engine seized, they took out a home equity line. When the barbecue place needed a walk-in cooler, they cashed a CD my grandmother left them. When the tax bill came, they refinanced. They didn't see it as bailing him out. They saw themselves as believing in him, and they said so, out loud, often, like it was a virtue. And then there was me. If Wade was the stained glass window everybody stopped to admire, I was the load-bearing wall. Nobody compliments a load-bearing wall. Nobody even looks at it. They just count on it not moving. I paid my own way through school on a scholarship and a job at the county extension office. I never asked them for a loan. I never needed rescuing. I learned young that the fastest way to keep peace in that house was to need nothing, because every dollar of what they had was already spoken for. They didn't call my independence an accomplishment. They called it convenient. I was the safety net that required no up. Here's the thing about being raised into a role. You don't notice the shape of it until you try to stand up straight. Mine cracked open on an ordinary Thursday when I was 26. Wade texted me a photo of a tow yard receipt. No hello, no question mark. Just they grabbed the truck off the lot over registration. $840 to get it out. I'm underwater till the 15th. Handle it. $840. I was making $32,000 a year at the time. That was my grocery money, my gas money, and the cushion in my checking account that let me sleep at night. I remember the exact feel of my debit card between my fingers. I remember telling myself that family shows up, that's what family does. He'd pay me back on the 15th, he said the 15th. The 15th came, nothing. December came, nothing. The next summer I brought it up to my mother gently at a cookout, and she looked at me with the sharpest face she owns and said, "Louise, your brother is under a mountain of pressure, and you've always been fine. Keeping score is an ugly habit." That's the sentence I carried for 13 years. You've always been fine. That was the day I understood something I didn't have words for yet. They didn't love me less than Wade, exactly. They loved me differently. They loved what I could absorb. They loved my usefulness. I wasn't a daughter with limits and needs in a life. I was a tool you take out of the drawer when something's leaking and put back when it stops. So when their text messages started arriving demanding a wire transfer for a motorhome, I wasn't shocked. I was almost impressed by the arithmetic of it. 2 decades of treating me like an appliance, and now the appliance had apparently started printing money. But here's what I couldn't figure out standing in that parking lot. Why now? I had paid off the last of my student loans that fall, $31,000, gone, handled quietly through the bank's website on a Tuesday night. And I'd traded in a rusted-out Corolla with a bad head gasket for a used pickup, 4 years old, nothing fancy, gray, the kind of truck half of Iowa drives. That's it. That's the whole visible evidence of my life changing, a paid loan and a used truck. That does not add up to a motor home. There was a variable missing. Something had turned their ordinary background resentment into a coordinated demand with a deadline attached. My phone buzzed a third time that night. It wasn't my mother. It was the family group chat, the one that had sat dead since Easter. Wade had sent a picture. I opened it. It was a screenshot off the local news out of Cedar Rapids, bottom of the screen, big yellow letters over footage of a gas station on Blair's Ferry Road. Anonymous Lynn County winner claims $3 dollars, dollars. And underneath, in smaller type, the station had listed the town where the ticket was sold. My town. I sat down on the edge of my bed with my coat still on and read it 3 times, and the whole ugly machine of their thinking clicked into place in front of me. 2 weeks before that broadcast, my old Corolla had finally quit on me on the interstate. I bought the truck. I drove that truck to my parents' house for my father's birthday dinner because I still went to those. And at that dinner, my father handed me a piece of mail that had gone to their address by mistake. A letter from the loan servicer confirming a balance of 0. I brushed it off. I said something vague about restructuring because I didn't want a conversation about my finances at a table with Wade sitting across from me. My father smiled that tight, calculating smile of his, and I watched his eyes go from the letter to me, to the gray truck sitting in his driveway. He filed it. Then, 11 days later, he watched the news. The winner claimed on a Wednesday. I showed up in a different vehicle on a Saturday. To a man who has been looking for a rescue his whole adult life, that isn't a coincidence, that's a confession. The group chat did not contain one question mark. Not one. Nobody asked if it was me. They went straight from the news graphic to dividing it up. My father first, that explains the truck. You thought you'd hide this from your own family. Wade, 40 seconds later, I need $400 to clear the lease and the vendors or smokehouse is done. You can cover that in your sleep now. Don't be like this. My father again, before I could even breathe, the dealer in Waterloo has a diesel pusher, 2019. They'll hold it 3 days. 320. After what your mother and I put into raising you, that's not a lot to ask. Wade, we all saw the news, Lou. Don't insult us. And then my mother. Diana always waits. She lets the men bang on the door first, and then she comes in soft. Her message showed up alone in a little gray bubble at the bottom. We know you'll do what's right for your brother. No, that little red heart was the heaviest thing on that screen. It was affection with a price tag stapled to it. It was a reminder that in that house, love was always available, as long as the check cleared by Friday. I set the phone face down, because here's the trap, and I want you to understand exactly how tight it was. I had not bought a lottery ticket. I have never bought a lottery ticket in my life. My grandmother thought they were a tax on hope, and she said so every single week of her 88 years, and I believed her. The money in my account was real, but it did not come from a gas station on Blair's Ferry Road. For 11 years, I worked as a designer and machinist for a small orthopedic device shop in Hiawatha. Braces, fixtures, the boring metal parts of medicine that nobody thinks about until they need one. And for about 3 years, on my own time, in my own garage, with a lathe I bought, used and paid off in installments, I worked on a locking mechanism for prosthetic limb attachment. The existing one's loosened, not dangerously, usually, just enough that a man who lost a leg at 60 had to sit down on a bench 3 times a day and readjust himself in public. I'd watched a patient do exactly that in a fitting room and go red in the face about it, and it bothered me the way a crooked picture frame bothers me, except 1,000 times worse, because it was a person. So I built a better one, 22 prototypes, 2 years of evenings, a patent I paid for myself in 3 installments on a credit card. And in September, a medical manufacturer out of Minneapolis licensed it, bought the rights outright with a milestone payment structure tied to their FDA submission. $3,800,000, the same number. To the dollar. The same number the news anchor read off a card about a stranger's lottery ticket. I have thought about that 100 times since, and I still don't have anything smarter to say about it than, sometimes the world hands you a coincidence shaped exactly like a knife. And the agreement I signed had teeth, a 9-month confidentiality window, non-negotiable, because the company was in a competitive submission process, and any disclosure of the terms, the amount, or the technology could compromise their position. If I breached it, if I so much as showed my parents the transfer records to prove I hadn't won a game of chance, they could void the agreement and come after me for damages that would swallow the whole payment, and then some. So I could not defend myself with the truth. But I want to tell you something harder than that, something I only admitted to myself later, sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m. Even if there had been no agreement, I don't think I would have told them. Because if my family believed I won the lottery, then the money was luck. Luck belongs to nobody. Luck is the sky opening up, and in their minds, if the sky opens up over one of us, it opens up over all of us. But if they found out I built something, that the quiet one, the useful one, the one who was always fine, had made $3.8 million out of a garage and a patent in 1,100 nights of her own stubbornness, that wouldn't make them proud. That would make them furious. They would still want the money, but they'd want it as a penalty, a fine for outgrowing the role they assigned me. So I let them keep the lie. And I want to be honest with you, at that moment, letting them believe it felt less like a strategy and more like a coward shortcut. It was 3 more weeks before I understood it was the only thing keeping me alive. 2 days later, my father sent a text that skipped the group chat entirely. Enough of this back and forth. Riverside Family Restaurant, 12:30. Don't make us come to your job. Riverside is where we went every Sunday after church when I was a kid. Vinyl booth the color of a stop sign, laminated menus, and a pie case by the register that hummed. He picked it on purpose. Familiar ground softens you up. And he knew I'd rather chew glass than have a scene in a room full of people who'd recognize my mother. I went anyway, not because I planned to give in, because some part of me still needed to see them try. They were in a corner booth by the kitchen doors, my father in a press shirt sitting up straighter than I'd seen him sit in years, my mother beside him, smoothing a paper napkin flat over and over with the side of her hand. They didn't stand up, nobody hugged me, nobody asked how I was. The waitress came before anybody spoke. My father didn't even glance at the menu. He ordered the 12-ounce ribeye, eggs over easy, hash browns loaded, and a large orange juice. Then he handed the menu back, tipped his head at me, and said, "Put it on one ticket, my daughter's celebrating." I ordered coffee. You have to understand who this man is. This is a man who drove 11 miles out of his way for 4 cents off a gallon of gas. A man who turned the thermostat down to 62 in January and told us to put on a sweater. A man whose anxiety about money was the weather system the rest of us lived under our entire childhoods. And now, on the strength of a news graphic, he was spending my money before I'd said a word. The waitress left. My father reached beside him and pulled out a folder. From the folder, 1 sheet of white printer paper. He turned it right side up and slid it across the table until it touched my hands. It was a spreadsheet, headers bolded, a total at the bottom. At the top it said, Family Allocation. First block was Wade. Lease arrears on Smokehouse 30, vendor payoffs, 2 personal credit cards in his name, a line item labeled Equipment Upgrade Expansion. Total for my brother, $460,000. The second block was them. Retirement coach, $320,000. Payoff on the house. Payoff on the equity line they'd drained for Wade. And a line just called living with a number beside it and no explanation at all. At the bottom, in bold, $1,900,000. Exactly half of the $3.8 million they thought I'd won. They hadn't come to congratulate me. They'd come to a board meeting. They'd granted themselves a 50% controlling interest in my life and printed it out on the same printer they use for church bulletins. We ran it with a fella at the credit union, my father said, and his voice had gone calm and official, like a man reading a bid. Lump sum, after tax, you're looking at about 2.6. Take care of this list. You're still walking away with $700,000 at 39 years old. That's a better start than anybody ever handed me. My mother reached over and put her hand on top of mine. I moved my hand. Her fingers landed on the formica. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, she said, and I have never in my life heard a sentence with less inside it. This is a blessing on this whole family. You know what your brother's been carrying. This saves him. We can finally breathe. And I sat there and I did the thing I do at work when a part fails and everybody's yelling. I separated the story from the data. The story was family, blessing, saving your brother, breathing. The data was 2 people willing to strip their daughter down to the studs to keep funding a son who had never once paid anybody back. And I understood right then that the truth wouldn't have saved me. If I'd violated my agreement, torn open my life, and laid the licensing paperwork on that sticky table, they would have looked at the exact same spreadsheet. They didn't care where it came from. They cared that it existed and that they believed they had a claim on it. So I looked up at my father and I said, in a voice so level it surprised me, I'm not paying this. The warmth went off my mother's face like somebody hit a switch. My father's jaw set. You're not hearing me, Louise. This is not a negotiation. This family housed you, fed you, raised you. You'll have those transfers moving by Friday, or you'll find out real fast what it means to turn your back on your own blood. The waitress arrived right then with a plate the size of a hubcap and set it down in front of him. I reached into my coat and put a 20 on the table next to my untouched coffee. Enough for the coffee and a good tip for a woman who did not deserve to be anywhere near that table. Enjoy your lunch, I said. And I walked out into the cold with the spreadsheet still sitting by the syrup. I got about 11 feet from the door before the manager caught me at the register, red-faced and apologetic, holding a ticket. My father had flagged him down from the booth and pointed at my back and announced to half the dining room that his daughter was covering the meal. I could have made a scene. I could have said loud enough for the pie case to hear that the man in the corner booth could pay for his own steak. Instead, I took out my debit card, a plain one, scuffed on the edges, the numbers half worn off from 11 years of careful use. Not the card of a woman with millions, the card of a woman who had been careful her entire life. The total was $51.18. I paid it, exactly. I put a 0 on the tip line because the waitress already had her 20 and I was not going to give that man 1 cent more than the arithmetic required. That receipt is the truest thing anybody ever wrote about my childhood. I covered the cost, I zeroed out the deficit, and what I got handed was the bill. I want you to remember the receipt. It comes back. Because what happened next is when this stopped being a family fight and became something with a case number on it. For 8 days, nothing. Silence from all of them. In my family, silence has never once meant peace. Silence means reloading. I was at the shop on a Thursday morning, running a fixture on the mill with my ear protection on, when my watch buzzed against my wrist. Motion alert, the camera over my front door, the little one I'd put up 2 years ago because packages kept walking off my porch. I pulled it up on my phone. My brother Wade was standing on my front step. Beside him was his wife Katrina in sunglasses in November, looking over her shoulder at the street. Wade was pointing at my mailbox. I have a locking box mounted next to the door, the kind the post office recommends, black metal, key on the bottom. Katrina held the storm door open. Wade took a flathead screwdriver out of his jacket, wedged it into the seam of that box, braced his forearm against the siding, and leaned. I stood in the middle of a machine shop with my safety glasses pushed up on my head and watched my only brother pry open my mail. The lock popped with a sound. The microphone picked up clean. They thought the state lottery commission mails the winner something. Paperwork, a tax form, a check maybe. They were tired of waiting for me to hand it over, so they'd driven across town to go get the proof themselves. Katrina shoved him aside and dug both hands into the box, tearing through envelopes, dropping what she didn't want on the concrete. A gas bill, a church newsletter, a coupon flyer for a tire shop. There was nothing in there. There was never going to be anything in there. She threw the last handful down on the step and stalked off toward the car. Wade stood a second longer, looking at that broken metal door hanging off its hinge, and then he jogged after her. And I want you to understand what I felt, because it wasn't rage, it was something colder and quieter than rage. I was standing in a clean shop with a licensing agreement and a fireproof box at home, and on that little screen my brother was committing a federal crime with a $5 tool to steal a gas bill. Tampering with a mailbox is a federal offense, so is taking mail that isn't yours. Those aren't family arguments. Those are the kind of thing men and windbreakers investigate. I did not call the police. I want to be honest about why. Not because I was noble. Because a squad car in my driveway would have turned a private advantage into a public mess, and I would have lost control of the story. Instead, I opened the camera dashboard on my laptop at lunch and exported the clip. The full thing, 11 minutes, with audio, showing the tool, the lock, Wade's face in daylight, Katrina's hands in my mail. I saved it to an encrypted folder, and I backed it up twice. That was the day I stopped being a target and started being a record keeper. And I was going to need it, because 6 days later, a certified letter showed up at my job, and the whole thing went from ugly to unbelievable. The return address was a law office in a strip mall outside Marion, between a payday loan place and a shop that sold above-ground pools. Attorney's name, Dale W. Hobart. 3 pages, stapled once in the corner. It smelled like a hot copier. The letterhead across the top was designed to scare a person. It would have worked better if it hadn't misspelled the word litigation. 1 vowel, sitting right there in the middle of the sentence, quiet and permanent. I spend my working life on tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. My family was coming after me with a lawyer who couldn't spell his own specialty. The letter was a cease and desist, plus notice of an intent to file a civil suit, and as I read it, my hands got cold. They weren't asking for a share anymore out of family obligation. They had invented a contract. According to that letter, on the Saturday before the drawing, my father handed me a $10 bill at his house and asked me to stop at the gas station on Blair's Ferry Road on my way home and buy 2 quick pick tickets. And the letter said, we entered into a verbal partnership right there in his driveway, agreeing to split any winnings evenly. I read it standing in the break room with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. My father has not handed me cash since I was in high school. On the Saturday in question, I bought my own gas, put a filter in my own furnace, and spent the evening in my garage cleaning up a drawing, alone, like most Saturdays. He had taken a coincidence, a zip code and a truck, and gone back, and manufactured a history to insert himself into a transaction that never happened. The letter accused me of fraud, of breach of an oral partnership agreement, and of concealing joint assets. It demanded $1,900,000 be placed into Mr. Hobart's trust account immediately. The exact number off the spreadsheet. And this is the part where I want to be very clear about how far they'd come, because it mattered. Demanding money is greed, ugly but human. Sitting in a rented office with a licensed attorney and constructing a detailed false event, a specific day, a specific gas station, a specific $10 bill, a specific sentence spoken in a driveway, and preparing to swear to it? That's something else. That's a decision. That takes an afternoon. My father has always believed lawsuits are a lever, not a system of justice. When I was a kid, a man came out to fix a section of our roof and left a grease mark on the driveway, and my father threatened to sue him into the ground until that poor man waived his whole labor charge just to be let go. I watched it happen from the front window. My father came inside and laughed about it and ate a sandwich. He was running the same play on me. He figured I'd look at the legal fees and the embarrassment and the sheer exhausting length of it, and I'd hand over a piece just to make it stop. My first instinct, 20 years of instinct, was to pick up the phone, call that number on the misspelled letterhead, and explain. Tell Mr. Hobart his clients were confused, tell him there was no ticket, there was a patent, and it was under seal. I got as far as putting my hand on the phone, and then I thought it through. If I explained, my father would simply change the story. The minute he learned the money came from a manufacturer, he'd drop the ticket and invent something new, that he'd bought my first lathe, that he'd paid a portion of my rent while I was developing it, that we'd had a different conversation in a different driveway about splitting a different thing. You cannot correct a person who is committed to a lie. You can only hand them better material. So I did not call Dale W. Hobart. I folded those 3 pages along their crease, put them in the box with my licensing agreement, and the next morning I drove 90 minutes to Des Moines. I'd found a firm downtown. Real one. Glass and steel, a receptionist who offered me sparkling water like it was nothing. The attorney's name was Marcus Feld. Charcoal suit, legal pad, the calm of a man who has watched a lot of people be very angry in his conference room. I put the cease and desist on the table first. He read it. He noticed the typo. Something moved at the corner of his mouth and then went away. Then I told him I was under a confidentiality agreement, and he explained attorney-client privilege to me the way you'd explain a seatbelt, and I put the licensing documents in front of him. He read for a long time, then he closed the folder, folded his hands, and asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted to write a letter. I wanted to tell them the truth, in writing, from a real law firm, and make them stop. And Marcus Feld said no. He said something to me that I have repeated to myself probably 400 times since. He said, right now your family is building a case out of air. If we tell them the truth today, they'll build a better one tomorrow. Every fact you give them is a fact they can bend, so we're not going to give them any. His advice was a total freeze. Do not answer the letter. Do not answer the phone. Do not respond to anything from anyone in any form. Because if they were going to file, we wanted them to file. We wanted my father to sign a sworn statement describing a $10 bill and a gas station and a sentence in a driveway. We wanted my mother and brother to back him up in writing. We wanted every bit of it on the record, under oath, before we said one single word. They think your silence is fear, he said. Let them. I drove home that night on I-80 with the heater on and something loose in my chest for the first time in a month. I had spent my whole life believing that if I could just explain myself clearly enough, people would be fair. I was 39 years old, and a stranger in a suit had just told me the most powerful thing I could do was sit perfectly still. That turned out to be the hardest thing anybody has ever asked me to do, because 2 weeks later they came at me in a way I hadn't planned for, and it worked. The suit got filed, and then my mother started calling. I had the ringer off, but the screen kept lighting up on my workbench. Dana, dana, dana. 30 seconds, go dark, light up again. 19 missed calls one day, 31 the next. She wasn't calling to work anything out. She was calling because my silence was unbearable to her. People like my family run on reaction. They push and they read the flinch, and that tells them where to push next. When you don't flinch, the machine has nothing to grip, and it starts to tear itself up. And then Wade went where I hadn't expected. He went to the whole town. My brother has a Facebook page for Smokehouse 30 with about 11,000 followers. Real ones, mostly local, people who like his ribs and his jokes and the photos of his kid. And he has a personal page too, and my mother's church group and the county swap page, and every one of them full of people who have known our family for 40 years. He made a video. He sat in the empty dining room of his restaurant, lights down, chairs up on the tables behind him, and he told them all that his baby sister had won $3.8 million in the lottery, and that she'd changed, that she'd stopped taking calls, that his parents were going to lose their house, that he was going to lose the business he'd built, that he never thought money could do that to a person, but here we were. He didn't use my name. He didn't have to. Cedar Rapids isn't that big. He cried at the end. Wade has always been able to cry on cue. He could do it at 8 years old to get out of mowing. I watched it twice, and then I made myself stop. I got 200 messages in 4 days from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. I got a note slipped under my door. Somebody keyed my truck in the lot at work, and I still don't know who, and I never will. And late one night, sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher because the chair felt like too much furniture, I scrolled the comments on that video. That was a mistake, and I knew it while I was doing it. And that's where I saw a name I recognized. Mr. Halvorson, my shop teacher from Kennedy High. The man who told a 16-year-old girl in a room full of boys that she had better hands than any of them and should think about doing it for a living. The man who wrote the recommendation letter that got me my first job. I had thought about him nearly every week of my adult life. Under my brother's video, Mr. Halvorson had written 4 words. What a shame. Money. I put the phone face down on the linoleum and I cried harder than I had at any point in the whole thing. Not over the lawsuit, not over my father, over 4 words from a 70-year-old man who taught me how to read a caliper. Because he wasn't cruel, he was fair. He had been given false numbers, and he had run them correctly, and he'd arrived at the only conclusion those numbers allowed. I opened a message to him 3 separate times. I typed, "Please remember who I was in your classroom." I deleted it 3 separate times. Because I couldn't tell him. Not yet, not for 11 more weeks. Marcus Feld had told me to hold the line. And here's the thing nobody tells you about holding a line. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like being buried alive with the answer in your mouth. But I held it. And then the mediation date came. 11th floor of a building in downtown Des Moines. Long oval table, mahogany, the kind of room where they keep the temperature 2 degrees too cold on purpose. A retired district judge at the head as neutral mediator, with a small digital recorder in front of him. They came in 10 minutes early, all 4 of them. My father in a gray suit he'd owned since my cousin's wedding. My mother with her good purse in her lap. Wade in a sport coat with no tie. And Dale W. Hobart in a navy blazer that gathered at the shoulders, carrying a briefcase the size of a cooler. They looked like people about to be handed something. Wade wouldn't stop looking at me, that flat, contemptuous look like I was a stranger who'd taken something off his porch. The judge went through the ground rules, purpose of the session, rules of evidence, and then he said the sentence that I have replayed more than any other. He said that any factual statements entered into the record in this proceeding were made under penalty of perjury, and that he wanted to be certain everyone understood that. I watched my father across that table. He nodded, confident, almost impatient. Marcus Feld wrote a single word on his legal pad and did not look up. Hobart opened. He gave a little speech about betrayal and family and a daughter blinded by sudden fortune. It was a closing argument for a jury that wasn't there. Marcus objected to none of it. He let the man use up every drop of credibility he had. Then Hobart asked my father to state, for the record, what happened. And my father built it. He named the gas station on Blair's Ferry Road. He gave the date. He said we met in his driveway on a Saturday afternoon and the leaves were down and he'd been raking. He said he took a $10 bill out of his wallet and put it in my hand and told me to get 2 quick pics on my way home. And then he said we'd shaken on it and that he had told me, quote, "Let's split our luck, Lulu." Lulu. He hadn't called me that since I was a child. He put it in there because he knew it would sound like a father. My mother nodded along beside him with her chin down, solemn, agreeing to a conversation that never occurred. Then she added her own. She said she was standing at the kitchen window and saw the whole thing, and that when I came in afterward I said something about being lucky for once. And Wade said that I'd told him about the partnership on the phone 2 days before the drawing, and that he'd congratulated me, and then I'd gone dark on everybody. 3 of them, under oath, on a recording, in coordinated, rehearsed, specific detail. But I want to tell you what I was actually watching, 'cause it wasn't their words. My father was sweating. It was 68 degrees in that room, and there were dark patches spreading under the arms of that gray suit. When the judge asked him to confirm the exact date, he hesitated, a half second, maybe less, and then when he said it, his voice came out thin. It wobbled on the number. He is a man who has bullied roofers and waitresses and his own children in living rooms his whole life. He had never once had to lie into a recorder with a judge sitting 4 feet away. He knew. Somewhere in him he knew what he was doing, and he did it anyway, because he wanted that money more than he wanted to be a man who hadn't done it. I didn't scoff. I didn't shake my head. I sat with my hands folded and my face completely empty, and I let him finish. Hobart stood up, smoothed his blazer, and delivered his number. "My clients aren't asking for punitive damages," he said. "They want what's rightfully theirs, $1,900,000 today, and this matter is closed. Otherwise we proceed to trial." My father let out a long breath. Relief. My mother put her hand over his and squeezed. Wade sat back and crossed his arms and finally allowed himself a small smile. They were waiting for us to counter. They fully expected Marcus Fell to ask for a recess, to haggle, to come back with a lower number, because that's what everybody does. Marcus did not reach for a calculator. He asked the mediator to confirm, on the record, that the sworn statements of Roy Prout, Deanna Prout, and Wade Prout were entered in full. The judge confirmed it. Then Marcus turned to Hobart and asked, very pleasantly, whether his clients wished to amend anything before the defense responded. Any date, any location, any detail at all. And Dale W. Hobart laughed, an actual laugh, dry, out loud, in that room. He said the testimony stood exactly as given. My family locked the door from the inside. Marcus reached down and opened his briefcase, 2 brass latches, one after the other, and that sound went through that room like a rifle bolt. He said his client rejected the demand in its entirety. My father started to come up out of his chair, red-faced, pointing at me, saying something about lawyer games. Hobart put a hand on his arm, the first sign the man had that the pressure in the room had changed. And then Marcus said it. He said Louise Prout has never purchased a lottery ticket in her life. He said she has never set foot in the station on Blair's Ferry Road. He said no $10 bill ever changed hands, and no conversation ever occurred in that driveway, on that date or any other. He said my silence over the previous 3 months was not guilt and it was not fear. It was a legal obligation. He explained that his client had been bound by a confidentiality agreement attached to a commercial licensing transaction, and that the 9-month restricted window had expired 11 days prior. And then he took out the folder. He slid it across that long table until it came to rest in front of Dale W. Hobart, and he narrated it while the man's eyes moved down the page. Patent? My name on it, filed 4 years earlier? Years before any of this. The assignment and licensing agreement with a medical device manufacturer in Minneapolis. The technical description of a locking mechanism for prosthetic attachment. The execution date in September. And then the wire confirmations. A corporate transfer. Direct deposit, $3,800,000. The exact number the news anchor had read off a card about a stranger. Here's what that folder did. It didn't just end their lawsuit. Their lawsuit was already dead the second the dates lined up. It exposed them. There was no ticket. There was no $10 bill. There was no partnership. The money they had spent 3 months trying to take out of my hands was the product of my own patent, my own garage, and 1,100 nights of my own work. And it had been legally mine on paper before my father ever watched that broadcast. And they had just spent 22 minutes swearing to the opposite, in specific detail, in front of a retired judge, on a recording, in an attempt to obtain nearly $2 million. I looked at Dale W. Hobart. He was reading the assignment date, then the wire date, then slowly the affidavit he himself had drafted for my father, comparing them. The timelines didn't conflict. They annihilated each other. Hobart was a strip mall attorney who made his living squeezing quick settlements out of fender benders and fence disputes. He was not equipped for what he had just participated in. He had presented perjured testimony to a former district judge. His license, his practice, his whole modest life was suddenly sitting on the table with everything else. He was holding a pen. His fingers just opened, and it dropped and hit that mahogany and rolled a few inches and stopped. He didn't pick it up. The sound of that pen hitting the table is what broke the spell over my family. My father looked at the documents, then at his lawyer, waiting for him to object, to call it a forgery, to do the thing lawyers do. Hobart said nothing at all. My mother made a small sound in her throat, like a hiccup that didn't finish. And Wade stared at that wire confirmation with his mouth slightly open, and I watched 2 things land on him in the same 3 seconds. The first was that his little sister, the useful one, the one who was always fine, had built something worth $3.8 million with her own hands and never told a soul. and the second was what he had just done, out loud on the record, to try to take it. Then Hobart stood up. He told the mediator, for the record, that he was withdrawing as counsel effective immediately, citing a conflict and material misrepresentations by his clients. My father grabbed his sleeve, actually grabbed it and told him to sit down, that they could work this out, that the technology money was still family money. Hobart pulled his arm away like he touched a stove. He told my father not to contact his office again. He snapped that big briefcase shut and walked out, and the door clicked, and the four of them were sitting in a room on the 11th floor with no lawyer and no story and a corporate litigator across the table. And then my mother did the thing she has done my entire life. She leaned forward, put her arms on the table, and rearranged her whole face into something soft. She said the licensing was wonderful news. She said they'd misunderstood, that the news had confused them, that they'd only done any of this because they were desperate and scared about losing the house. And she said that since the money was real, there was no reason we couldn't still be a family, that we could put all this behind us today, that we could save Wade's place and move forward together. And then she said, "Sweetheart," that word, the same one she used at Riverside with a spreadsheet on the table between us. She was asking me to walk away from a coordinated attempt to take everything I'd built, and to accept her arms around me on the grounds that we share a last name. I didn't argue. I didn't shake my head. I didn't cry. I looked directly at my mother, and I said nothing at all. I let it stretch. 5 seconds. 10. Long enough that the air in that room got thick, and I watched her understand, really understand, for the first time in 39 years, that the currency she had spent my entire life paying me in had no value anymore. That silence said it better than any sentence I could have built. Then Marcus reached into his briefcase one more time. He took out a slim envelope and slid it across the table. From it he removed a single photograph, printed large and sharp, and a small black flash drive, and set them in front of my parents. The photograph was a still frame from my doorbell camera. Wade, in daylight, both hands on a flathead screwdriver wedged into the seam of my locked mailbox, Katrina beside him with her arm inside it. Katrina wasn't in the room. Wade made a sound I had never heard out of him before. I broke my silence then. First time I'd spoken in that room. I told them the drive held the full 11 minutes with audio. I told them that tampering with a residential mailbox and taking mail that doesn't belong to you are federal offenses, investigated by federal inspectors, prosecuted in federal court. I said it flat, the way you'd read a torque spec, and then I gave them my terms. I said I would not forward that drive to the postal inspector, on condition. 1. All four of them, Roy, Dana, Wade, and Katrina, sign a permanent, binding no-contact agreement. No calls, no emails, no showing up at my house, my job, or anywhere I am. 2. They cover my legal costs in full. Every hour Marcus Feld had billed defending me against a lawsuit they invented. And 3, it's permanent. If any one of them contacts me in any form, ever, the drive goes to the postal inspector by close of business, and the transcript of that morning's sworn testimony goes with it. My father opened his mouth. I watched him look for a lever, some angle, some pride, some last piece of leverage, and find that there wasn't one anywhere in the room. He closed his mouth and nodded. I stood up. I picked up my coat. I did not say goodbye to any of them. I walked out into a carpeted hallway and pressed the elevator button and rode down 11 floors alone. And when I stepped out onto that sidewalk in Des Moines, the cold hit my face, and I just stood there and breathed it. Here's what happened after, because I know you want to know, and because I want to be honest about the parts that aren't satisfying. They signed. All four of them within 9 days. The signatures were jagged, pressed too hard into the paper. My father paid the legal bill. It came to a number that meant something to him. I later heard he sold his boat and cashed out what was left of a small annuity to cover it, on top of what he still owed Hobart. There was no redemption. Nobody wrote me a letter. Nobody came around a year later having done the work. I want to tell you they did, because that's how the good stories end, but I'm not going to lie to you at the end of a story about lying. Smokehouse 30 closed in April, without our parents' money behind it, and without me as the emergency valve, nobody named. It lasted about 4 months. The landlord changed the locks. They auctioned the smoker and the walk-in, and that beautiful neon sign. and I'm told the sign went for $800 to a man in Marion who put it in his pole barn. My parents kept their house, but only just, and there is no motorhome in their driveway, and there never will be. They spent 39 years teaching me that the family came first, and then they blew it apart chasing a jackpot that never existed. And me? I stayed in Iowa. I thought about leaving. I looked at listings in Colorado for a while, but I didn't want to be run out of the place my grandmother is buried. I bought 11 acres outside Solon and built a shop on it with a concrete floor and heat, and I licensed my second design out of that shop now, and I hire 2 people, and both of them get paid on the 15th no matter what. And I did one more thing. In August, when the confidentiality window was long expired and none of it was secret anymore, I looked up Mr. Halvorsen and I drove to his house and knocked on his door. I brought the patent with me, not to prove anything. I just wanted him to see the drawing. He looked at it for a long time on his kitchen table with his glasses pushed up, tracing the mechanism with one finger, and then he looked up at me and his eyes were wet and he said, "Louise, those are still the best hands I ever taught." We had coffee for 2 hours. He apologized for the comment about 8 times, and I told him to quit it because he'd been handed bad numbers by a man who cried on camera, and any decent person would have run them the same way. I go see him about once a month now. That's what I got instead of my parents. I'll take it. So here's what I want to leave you with. From one careful person to another. If you've been the quiet one, the one who absorbs the shocks and nobody else has to feel the bump, the one everybody calls when something breaks and nobody calls when nothing does, I want you to hear this. You are not obligated to keep funding a thing that empties you out. You do not need anyone's permission to stop writing the check, and keeping the peace is not the same as honoring your family. Sometimes keeping the peace is just paying the ransom quietly enough that nobody has to admit there's a hostage. I also want to tell you the thing that surprised me most, because it might be the only useful thing I learned. The day my mother said they would erase me from the family, I braced for grief. And the grief came, but it wasn't grief for them. It was grief for the parents I had made up in my head and hoped for every Christmas for 39 years. You cannot lose something you never actually had. What they threatened to take away was conditional love. And conditional love isn't love. It's a transaction wearing love's coat. The night after the mediation, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off and the heat clicking on, and it was quieter in that house than it had been in a year. Nothing buzzed, nothing lit up, nobody wanted anything. And I thought about that receipt from Riverside. $51.18, paid to the penny, nothing owed, nothing given. That was the last transaction of my old life. So look around your table tonight, at the warm plates and the familiar voices and the walls you've kept standing. I hope it's good. I hope it's real. But if you ever find yourself wondering, and some of you already are, I know it. I can feel it through the screen. Ask yourself the honest question. If the money disappeared tomorrow, would those chairs still be full? Or have you only ever been renting their company? If any part of this landed on you tonight, tell me in the comments. Tell me about the moment you finally set the boundary, or the one you're still working up the nerve to set. I read them. And if you want more stories like this, quiet people, hard lines, and the receipts that finally came out, subscribe and stay with us. Take care of your own foundation. You're the only one who has to live inside it.